The hardest truths in life aren't the ones we don't know. They're the ones we refuse to accept. You will lose everything you love. You will be forgotten. You will suffer more than you think you can endure. And yet, through all of this, you can remain unbroken. The Stoics didn't promise happiness. They promised strength, forged in the fire of truth. This isn't a story about feeling good. It's a story about becoming good. Because life doesn't care about your comfort, only your courage. The morning you wake up and realize you've been living a lie is the morning you begin to live truthfully. For most of us, that morning never comes. We drift through existence believing we are the captains of our ships, the masters of our destiny, the architects of our fate. We grip the steering wheel of life with white knuckles, convinced that if we just try hard enough, plan thoroughly enough, worry intensely enough, we can control the outcome. Epictetus, a man who knew something about powerlessness, having spent years as a slave, understood this fundamental delusion better than most. Some things are up to us, he wrote, others are not. 4 words that sound simple until you truly comprehend their devastating implications. Because if you're honest, truly honest, about what falls into each category, you'll discover that almost everything you spend your time worrying about belongs firmly in the second camp. You cannot control whether you get the job. You can control your preparation, your effort, your attitude. But the decision lies in hands other than yours, influenced by factors you cannot see, shaped by circumstances you cannot predict. You cannot control whether your children love you. You can control how you treat them, how present you are, how consistently you show up. But their hearts, their choices, their feelings toward you remain forever beyond your reach. You cannot control whether your business succeeds. Market forces, economic downturns, competitor innovations, consumer preferences, regulatory changes. 1,000 variables dance in patterns too complex for any mind to fully grasp. You cannot control whether your spouse remains faithful. Trust is not control. Love is not ownership. Commitment is a daily choice made by another autonomous being who remains, fundamentally, a mystery. You cannot control whether you get sick. Genetics, environmental factors, random cellular mutations, viral exposure. Your body operates according to laws that predate your birth and will outlast your death. You cannot control whether your parents approve of your choices. Their values, formed by their experiences, filtered through their fears and hopes and disappointments, create a lens through which they see you, a lens you did not craft and cannot adjust. The list goes on, and the more honest you become about it, the more terrifying it becomes. Because we have built our entire sense of security, our whole identity, our complete worldview around the assumption that we have far more control than we actually possess. We are children playing with toy steering wheels while someone else drives the car. Watch a man in traffic, raging at the cars that won't move, the lights that won't change, the universe that refuses to accommodate his schedule. See how his blood pressure rises, how his jaw clenches, how his entire nervous system floods with stress chemicals, all in response to something completely beyond his influence. He might as well be shouting at the rain to stop falling or commanding the sun to set more slowly. But we do this every day, in 1,000 smaller ways. We stress about our reputation as if we could control what others think. We worry about the future as if our anxiety could alter coming events. We ruminate about the past as if our regret could rewrite history. We exhaust ourselves trying to manage things that exist entirely outside our sphere of influence. The cruel irony is that in our desperate attempt to control what we cannot control, we often neglect what we actually can control. While we're busy trying to manipulate external circumstances, we ignore our internal responses. While we're focused on changing other people, we overlook changing ourselves. While we're attempting to bend the world to our will, we forget that our will itself is the one thing we might actually have dominion over. Consider the sand slipping through your fingers. The harder you squeeze, the faster it falls. The tighter your grip, the more you lose. This is not a metaphor. This is the literal truth of how control works in human life. The illusion of control is not just wrong, it's counterproductive. It creates suffering where none need exist and blindness where clarity could flourish. The Stoic recognition of our limited control is not pessimistic, it's realistic. And within that realism lies a strange kind of freedom. When you stop trying to control the uncontrollable, you discover how much energy you've been wasting. When you stop fighting reality, you can start working with it. When you release your grip on outcomes, you can focus entirely on inputs. This doesn't mean becoming passive, it means becoming precise. Instead of diffusing your effort across 100 variables you cannot influence, you concentrate it on the few you can. Instead of spreading your anxiety thin across all possible futures, you channel your attention into present choices. Instead of exhausting yourself trying to change the world, you invest yourself in changing your response to the world. The brutal truth that hurts to hear is this: you have been living under an illusion, and that illusion has been making you miserable. You have been trying to do the impossible while neglecting the possible. You have been playing a game with rules that don't exist while ignoring the game that's actually being played. But here's what might hurt even more. You've known this all along. Deep down, beneath the stories you tell yourself, beneath the strategies you employ, beneath the worry and planning and desperate grasping, you've always known that you're not really in control. You've just been too frightened to admit it. The question now is whether you're brave enough to stop pretending, whether you're strong enough to face the truth, whether you're wise enough to find freedom in surrender. Because until you do, you'll remain a prisoner of your own expectations, forever frustrated by a world that refuses to comply with your demands. And that's a prison no one else can unlock. We carry invisible weights through life, not in our backs or our hands, but in our minds. These weights are our expectations, and they grow heavier with each passing year, each accumulated disappointment, each gap between what we hoped for and what we received. We don't even notice we're carrying them until the burden becomes unbearable, until we find ourselves crushed beneath the simple act of living. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his private journal while governing an empire, understood this burden intimately. You have power over your mind, not outside events, he reminded himself. Realize this, and you will find strength. But embedded in this reminder is a recognition that he, like all of us, constantly forgot this truth. He had to write it down, had to repeat it to himself, because the human mind naturally generates expectations the way the heart pumps blood, constantly, unconsciously, inevitably. We expect our children to be grateful. We expect our efforts to be rewarded. We expect good people to prosper and bad people to suffer. We expect fairness, recognition, reciprocity. We expect the weather to cooperate with our plans, traffic to respect our schedule, technology to work when we need it. We expect our bodies to remain young, our minds to stay sharp, our energy to last forever. But expectation is not hope, it's demand. When we hope for something, we remain open to other possibilities. When we expect something, we close ourselves off to any reality that doesn't match our projection. Hope says, This would be wonderful. Expectation says, this should happen. And that word, should, is where suffering begins. Consider the parent who expects their child to follow their career path. They've imagined family dinners where they discuss shared professional interests, pictured their child taking over the family business, envisioned a legacy continuing through generations. But their child wants to be an artist, a teacher, a traveler, anything but what the parent planned. The parent's suffering doesn't come from their child's choice. It comes from the collision between expectation and reality. The child hasn't failed. The expectation has. But we rarely blame our expectations. We blame the world for not conforming to them. Watch how this plays out in romance. We meet someone and immediately begin constructing an elaborate future in our minds. We expect them to love us the way we love them, to prioritize us the way we prioritize them, to see the relationship through the same lens we use. We expect them to change in the ways we want them to change, and to remain the same in the ways we need them to stay the same. We expect them to somehow be both completely authentic and perfectly suited to our desires. When they inevitably reveal themselves to be human, complex, contradictory, autonomous, we experience this as betrayal. Not because they've done anything wrong, but because they've failed to be the person our expectations created. We suffer not from their reality, but from the death of our fantasy. The workplace operates as a machinery of expectation. We expect hard work to be rewarded, talent to be recognized, dedication to be appreciated. We expect fair treatment, clear communication, logical decision-making. We expect our colleagues to be competent, our bosses to be wise, our organizations to be efficient. When these expectations inevitably crash against the messy reality of human institutions, we call it injustice. But injustice implies a standard that was never agreed upon, a promise that was never made. The brutal truth is that most of our suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from the story we tell ourselves about what should have happened. The gap between expectation and reality becomes a wound we pick at constantly, never allowing it to heal, never questioning whether the expectation itself might be the problem. Consider how different your emotional life would be if you could experience events without the overlay of expectation. Rain would be rain, not bad weather that ruins your plans. Your friend's cancellation would be information, not betrayal. Your child's different choices would be curiosity, not disappointment. Your partner's moods would be human complexity, not personal rejection. This doesn't mean becoming passive or lowering your standards. It means recognizing that your emotional well-being depends not on the world meeting your expectations, but on your ability to engage with reality as it is, rather than as you think it should be. It means understanding that expectation is a form of resistance to what's actually happening, and resistance creates suffering. The Stoics practiced this through a mental exercise called negative visualization, imagining loss, imagining failure, imagining disappointment before it arrives. Not to become pessimistic, but to become prepared. When you've already accepted that things might not go as planned, you can't be crushed when they don't. When you've already made peace with imperfection, you can't be shattered by it. But this practice reveals something even more unsettling. How much of our identity is built on our expectations being met? We don't just expect good outcomes, we expect them as proof that we're good people, that we're living correctly, that the universe recognizes our worth. When expectations aren't met, we don't just experience disappointment, we experience a crisis of meaning. The executive who expects a promotion and doesn't get it questions not just their career strategy, but their entire self-worth. The parent whose child struggles questions not just their parenting methods, but their fundamental adequacy as a human being. The spouse whose marriage fails questions not just their relationship skills, but their capacity to be loved. This is why unmet expectations hurt so much. They don't just disappoint us, they seem to negate us. But this equation, where external outcomes determine internal worth, is precisely what creates the unbearable weight of expectation. When you need the world to cooperate in order to feel okay about yourself, you've made your peace of mind hostage to forces beyond your control. The weight of expectation grows heavier, not just because we accumulate more disappointments, but because we accumulate more evidence that we're not in control of outcomes. Each unmet expectation should teach us to hold them more lightly, but instead, we often hold them more tightly, convinced that if we just expect more clearly, more specifically, more intensely, reality will finally comply. The liberation comes not from having your expectations met, but from releasing the demand that they must be met for you to be okay. This is perhaps the most difficult spiritual practice imaginable, learning to engage fully with life while remaining unattached to specific outcomes. It requires a fundamental shift from "this should happen" to "let's see what happens." And what happens when you make this shift is that life becomes workable again. Not easier, not safer, not more predictable, but workable. Because you're no longer fighting reality, you're dancing with it. There's a moment in every human life when the mythology of fairness finally crumbles. For some, it happens early. The child whose parent dies, the teenager who faces discrimination, the young adult whose efforts go unrewarded, while others succeed through luck or privilege. For others, it takes decades of accumulated evidence before the truth becomes undeniable. The world is not fair, has never been fair, and was never designed to be fair. This realization is devastating because fairness is perhaps our most fundamental expectation. It's embedded in our earliest moral education, reinforced by stories and laws and social contracts. We teach children to share, to take turns, to treat others as they want to be treated, all based on the implicit promise that fairness is both possible and expected. But somewhere between the playground and the graveyard, this promise reveals itself as perhaps the cruelest lie we tell ourselves. Watch how adults react when life treats them unfairly. The shock in their voice when they say, "This isn't right." The indignation when they declare, "This shouldn't be happening." The sense of betrayal when they realize that playing by the rules doesn't guarantee favorable outcomes. They speak as if fairness were a law of physics being violated, rather than a human concept being tested against an indifferent universe. The hard-working employee gets laid off while the slacker gets promoted. The faithful spouse gets cheated on while the unfaithful one finds lasting love elsewhere. The careful driver gets hit by the drunk driver who walks away unharmed. The person who exercises daily and eats well gets cancer, while the person who abuses their body lives to 100. The generous giver dies broke, while the selfish hoarder dies wealthy. These aren't exceptions to the rule. They are the rule. Fairness is the exception, a brief and accidental alignment of outcome with desert that we mistake for the natural order of things. We notice it when it's absent because we expect it to be present, but this expectation has no basis in reality. It's a hope masquerading as an entitlement. The universe operates according to laws, gravity, thermodynamics, evolution, but fairness is not among them. Fairness is a human invention, a social construct, a tool we've created to organize civilization. And like all tools, it works sometimes and fails sometimes, depending on how it's used and whether the conditions support its application. Consider natural disasters. Earthquakes don't target the evil and spare the good. Hurricanes don't check your moral record before deciding whether to destroy your home. Viruses don't consult your contributions to society before deciding whether to infect you. Cancer doesn't review your kindness score before choosing its host. These forces operate according to their own logic, indifferent to human concepts of justice. But we don't just expect fairness from nature, we expect it from other humans, and this expectation creates perhaps even more suffering. We expect people to treat us the way we treat them. We expect reciprocity, gratitude, recognition. We expect good behavior to be rewarded and bad behavior to be punished. We expect consistent application of rules and equal treatment under them. These expectations set us up for constant disappointment because humans are not fair dispensing machines. They are complex beings driven by self-interest, emotions, unconscious biases, and limited perspective. They make decisions based on incomplete information, personal history, and immediate pressures. They have favorites and blind spots, good days and bad days, conscious principles and unconscious patterns. The boss who promotes based on personal affinity rather than merit isn't necessarily corrupt. They might genuinely believe their favorite employee is most qualified, or they might not even realize their bias is operating. The friend who doesn't reciprocate your generosity isn't necessarily ungrateful. They might have different ways of showing care, or different capacities for giving, or simply different priorities. This doesn't excuse harmful behavior or eliminate the need for accountability. It simply recognizes that expecting fairness as a default state is like expecting water to flow uphill. It requires constant energy to achieve and maintain, and it's always fighting against natural tendencies. The Stoics understood this deeply. They didn't rage against unfairness because they didn't expect fairness. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "How much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does, but only to what he does himself." This wasn't indifference to injustice. It was recognition that expecting others to behave fairly was a recipe for perpetual frustration. Instead, they focused on what they called their own duty, acting rightly regardless of whether others did the same, regardless of whether their righteousness was rewarded, regardless of whether the universe seemed to care about their moral efforts. They did good because good was worth doing, not because goodness guaranteed good outcomes. This perspective is initially horrifying because it strips away the comforting illusion that virtue is rewarded and vice is punished. It suggests that we might live exemplary lives and still suffer greatly, that we might be generous and kind and still face loss and betrayal and pain. It implies that morality is its own reward because it might be the only reward we get. But within this horror lies a strange liberation. When you stop expecting the world to be fair, you stop being surprised when it isn't. When you stop demanding that others treat you as you treat them, you stop being hurt when they don't. When you stop believing that good behavior should be rewarded, you can engage in good behavior for its own sake. The person who helps others without expecting recognition can't be disappointed by lack of appreciation. The employee who works hard without expecting promotion can't be crushed when advancement doesn't come. The spouse who loves without expecting perfect reciprocity can't be destroyed by their partner's limitations. This doesn't mean becoming cynical or stopping efforts to create fairness where possible. Laws, institutions, and social norms that promote justice are valuable precisely because fairness doesn't occur naturally, but it means engaging in these efforts without the naive expectation that fairness can be permanently achieved or universally applied. The brutal truth about fairness is not just that it doesn't exist, but that our expectation of it is what creates much of our suffering. We don't suffer because life is unfair. We suffer because we believe it should be fair. We don't suffer because people treat us badly. We suffer because we expect them to treat us well. When you release the expectation of fairness, you don't become passive or amoral. You become realistic. You can still work toward justice without being devastated when you don't achieve it. You can still treat others well without being crushed when they don't return the favor. You can still hope for good outcomes without being destroyed when you get bad ones. The world owes you nothing. It never did. It never promised to be fair, to make sense, to reward virtue or punish vice. These were stories we told ourselves to make existence bearable, but the stories were never true. The sooner you accept this, the sooner you can stop wasting energy on resentment and start investing it in response. Because the question isn't whether life is fair. The question is what kind of person you choose to be in an unfair world. You are going to die, and when you do, the universe will continue exactly as if you had never existed. This thought, which should be obvious given that billions of people have already died without stopping the cosmic machinery, somehow feels shocking when applied to yourself. Your ego, that elaborate construction of identity, importance, and permanence, cannot truly accept its own temporary nature. The ego is perhaps humanity's most sophisticated defense mechanism, a psychological fortress built to protect us from the terrifying truth of our insignificance. It whispers constant reassurances. You matter, you're special, you're different, you're permanent. It creates elaborate stories about your importance, your uniqueness, your lasting impact. It builds monuments to itself in achievements, relationships, possessions. Anything that seems to prove your existence matters in some ultimate sense. But the Stoics understood what modern psychology is only beginning to rediscover. The ego is not your friend. It's a prison disguised as a palace, a burden masquerading as a treasure. Every moment you spend protecting it, feeding it, defending it, is a moment stolen from the actual experience of being alive. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the world during his lifetime, spent his private moments reminding himself of his cosmic insignificance. Remember how brief life is, how vast the universe, he wrote. Remember that tomorrow is uncertain, and even if it comes, it brings no guarantee that it will resemble today. This wasn't depression, it was clarity. This wasn't self-hatred, it was self-honesty. Consider what happens when your ego is threatened. Someone criticizes your work, and instead of hearing feedback, you hear attack. Someone succeeds where you failed, and instead of feeling inspiration, you feel diminishment. Someone ignores your opinion, and instead of accepting their autonomy, you feel insulted. Someone achieves recognition you wanted, and instead of celebrating their success, you feel cheated. These reactions reveal the ego's fundamental delusion, that there's a finite amount of worth in the universe, and others having more means you having less. The ego experiences other people's success as your failure, their happiness as your loss, their recognition as your invisibility. It turns life into a zero-sum competition where everyone else's gain threatens your value. But what is this you that feels so threatened? When you examine it closely, the ego reveals itself to be nothing more than a collection of stories, memories, preferences, and identifications. You think you are your job, your relationships, your achievements, your possessions, your opinions, your history. But strip away these external attachments, and what remains? The exercise is terrifying because what remains seems to be nothing, or at least nothing the ego can recognize as substantial. You are not your career because that can change or end. You are not your relationships because those people are autonomous beings who might leave or die. You are not your achievements because those exist in the past and can be surpassed or forgotten. You are not your possessions because those are temporary accumulations that will outlast you or be destroyed. You are not even your body, which is constantly changing, aging, moving toward its own dissolution. You are not your thoughts, which arise and pass away without your control. You are not your emotions, which shift like weather systems across the landscape of consciousness. Everything the ego claims as self is either external, temporary, or beyond your ultimate control. This recognition that the ego is essentially empty is what Buddhists call no self, and what Stoics approached through exercises in cosmic perspective. Both traditions understand that the ego's death is not something that happens when your body dies. It's something that can happen while you're fully alive, and when it does, it's liberating rather than devastating. When the ego dies, what dies with it? The constant need for validation, the exhausting work of maintaining an image, the painful comparison with others, the fear of criticism, the hunger for recognition, the anxiety about legacy, the endless internal monologue that narrates your specialness and justifies your importance, finally goes quiet. What remains is not nothing, it's everything. Without the ego's narrow focus on protecting and promoting itself, you can actually experience life directly. You can appreciate beauty without needing to own it, witness others' success without feeling diminished by it, receive criticism without feeling attacked, face failure without feeling destroyed. The death of ego doesn't make you passive or careless, it makes you effective. When you're not spending energy on self-protection, you can invest it in actual engagement. When you're not worried about looking good, you can focus on doing good. When you're not concerned with getting credit, you can concentrate on getting results. Consider how different your work would be if you didn't need recognition for it. How much more creative would you be if you weren't worried about judgment? How much more present would you be in relationships if you weren't constantly monitoring how you were being perceived? How much more alive would you feel if you weren't always trying to prove your aliveness? The ego promises security but delivers anxiety. It promises importance but delivers isolation. It promises permanence but reminds you constantly of your mortality. Every strategy it employs to protect you ends up imprisoning you. But the ego doesn't die easily. It will fight to survive, creating elaborate justifications for its necessity. It will convince you that without it, you'll become a doormat, that you need it to succeed, that losing it means losing everything valuable about yourself. It will make ego death seem like actual death, because, from its perspective, it is. The Stoic practice of memento mori, remember you will die, is not morbid fascination with mortality. It's a daily reminder that the ego's desperate scrambling for permanence is futile. You will die. Your achievements will be forgotten. Your name will fade from memory. Your impact will be absorbed into the vast flow of history. This is not tragic. It's simply true. And within this truth lies tremendous freedom. If you're going to die anyway, if your importance is temporary anyway, If your ego will dissolve anyway, why not let it go now? Why not experience what lies beyond it while you still have the chance? What lies beyond ego is not the absence of self, but the presence of being. Not the negation of identity, but the discovery of what identity really is when it's not built on the shifting sands of external validation. Not the end of caring, but the beginning of caring about what actually matters. The death of ego is not something that happens to you, it's something you allow. And allowing it might be the most courageous thing you ever do, because it means facing the truth that your ego has spent your entire life helping you avoid. You are both completely insignificant in the cosmic sense and absolutely essential in the immediate sense. You don't matter to the universe, but you matter completely to this moment. And this moment is all you've ever actually had. Pain is the most honest teacher you will ever encounter. It cannot be bribed, manipulated, or deceived. It arrives uninvited, stays as long as necessary, and leaves only when its lesson has been learned, or when you have learned to stop fighting it. Every human being will receive this education, whether they want it or not, because pain is not a malfunction of life, it is a feature of it. We live in a culture that treats pain as the enemy, something to be avoided, numbed, or eliminated as quickly as possible. We reach for pills, distractions, substances, anything that might dull the sharp edges of discomfort. We speak of pain as a problem to be solved rather than a message to be received. But this approach is like shooting the messenger who brings urgent news. You silence the warning, but you don't address the crisis it announces. The Stoics understood that pain serves a purpose beyond mere suffering. Seneca wrote, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." But he might have added that every end comes through the fire of pain, and every beginning requires walking through that fire rather than around it. Pain is the crucible in which character is forged, the pressure under which diamonds form, the resistance that builds strength. Consider the different types of pain that life inevitably delivers. There's the sharp, sudden pain of loss, the death of someone you love, the end of a relationship, the collapse of a dream you've nurtured for years. This pain feels like tearing, like something essential being ripped away from you, leaving you wondering how you can possibly continue with such a fundamental part of yourself missing. Then there's the slow, grinding pain of disappointment, years of effort that lead nowhere. The gradual recognition that you're not as talented as you thought. The creeping awareness that your life is smaller and more ordinary than you imagined. This pain feels like erosion, like being worn down grain by grain until you barely recognize what remains. There's the burning pain of humiliation, being exposed as inadequate, failing publicly, discovering that others see you differently than you see yourself. This pain feels like being turned inside out, like having your most vulnerable parts displayed for judgment. And there's the deep, aching pain of isolation, the recognition that despite being surrounded by people, you are fundamentally alone, that no one can truly understand your experience, that even your closest relationships cannot bridge the essential gap between one consciousness and another. Each type of pain teaches different lessons, but they all share one common curriculum. They teach you who you really are when everything you thought you were is stripped away. Pain is not interested in your self-image, your carefully constructed identity, your preferred version of reality. It meets you where you actually are, not where you pretend to be. Watch what happens when pain arrives. Your first instinct is to escape it, to deny it, fight it, explain it away, Find someone to blame for it. You tell yourself it shouldn't be happening, that it's unfair, that you don't deserve it. You exhaust yourself trying to return to the state you were in before the pain arrived, as if you could somehow undo what has been done. But pain is patient. It will wait while you rage against it, while you bargain with it, while you try to think your way around it. It knows that eventually you will exhaust your strategies of avoidance and be forced to meet it directly. And when you finally do, when you stop running and turn to face what hurts, something remarkable happens. The pain doesn't kill you. This discovery, which seems obvious from the outside, is revolutionary from the inside. You survive the unsurvivable. You endure the unendurable. You continue breathing when breathing seems impossible. The pain that felt like it would destroy you reveals itself to be something you can carry, something you can integrate, something that can coexist with your continued existence. But survival is just the beginning of what pain teaches. As you learn to stop fighting it, you begin to notice what it's actually showing you. The pain of loss teaches you what you truly valued, not what you thought you valued, but what your heart actually held dear. The pain of failure teaches you where your identity was too fragile, too dependent on external validation, too narrow to contain your full humanity. The pain of betrayal teaches you about trust, not that you should never trust again, but that trust is always a risk, always a choice, always an act of courage rather than certainty. The pain of illness teaches you about the temporary nature of everything you take for granted, the precious ordinariness of simple things like breathing without effort or moving without discomfort. Perhaps most importantly, pain teaches you about your own capacity, not just your capacity to suffer, which is greater than you imagined, but your capacity to heal, to adapt, to continue growing even after being broken. You discover resources within yourself that you never knew existed, strengths that only emerge under pressure, abilities that develop only in response to necessity. The person who has never experienced significant pain remains, in important ways, a child. They may be accomplished, intelligent, even kind, but they lack the depth that only comes from having been tested by suffering. They cannot truly empathize with others' struggles because they haven't faced their own. They cannot appreciate ordinary happiness because they've never known its absence. This doesn't mean we should seek pain or glorify suffering. Pain is not good in itself. It simply is, like gravity or weather. But our response to pain can be good or bad, constructive or destructive, growth-inducing or growth-inhibiting. The person who learns to work with pain rather than against it discovers that it can be transformed from an enemy into an ally. The Stoic exercise of premeditatio malorum, imagining loss and suffering before they arrive, is not pessimism, but preparation. When you've already contemplated the worst-case scenarios, when you've already felt in imagination what real loss might bring, you're better equipped to handle it when it actually comes. You're less likely to be overwhelmed, more likely to respond wisely rather than react blindly. But the deeper purpose of this practice is to recognize that pain is not the opposite of a good life. It's an integral part of any complete life. The person who tries to avoid all pain ends up avoiding life itself, creating a smaller and smaller circle of safety that eventually becomes a prison. The mirror of pain shows you things about yourself that no other experience can reveal. It shows you your attachments, what you cling to so tightly that losing it causes agony. It shows you your fears, what you're so afraid of that anticipating it creates suffering. It shows you your limitations, where your current way of being in the world is insufficient for what life demands. But it also shows you your resilience, your capacity to love even when love brings loss, your ability to hope even after hope has been disappointed, your willingness to remain open even after openness has led to hurt. Pain reveals not just your weaknesses, but your strengths, strengths you couldn't know you possessed until you were forced to use them. The brutal truth about pain is that avoiding it is impossible, but resisting it is what turns inevitable discomfort into unnecessary suffering. The person who accepts pain as a teacher rather than fighting it as an enemy discovers that even the harshest lessons can lead to the deepest wisdom. And wisdom, once gained through pain, can never be taken away. It becomes part of who you are, woven into your understanding so completely that you cannot imagine being without it. This is why those who have suffered deeply often speak of their pain as a gift, not because suffering itself is good, but because what suffering teaches when received with an open heart is invaluable. The fire that burns away what is false also reveals what is true. And what is true, it turns out, is strong enough to withstand any flame. You are an addict, and your drug of choice is more. More money, more recognition, more love, more time, more experiences, more things, more achievements, more validation. You chase this drug with the desperate intensity of someone convinced that the next hit will finally be enough, that the next acquisition will fill the void, that the next success will prove your worth. But like all addictions, the pursuit of more is a prison disguised as freedom. Watch yourself for just one day. Notice how many times you think, if I just had, or once I get, or when I finally achieve. You'll discover that your mind is constantly reaching beyond the present moment towards some imagined future where having more will make you feel complete. This reaching, this constant grasping, this inability to be satisfied with what is, this is the prison of desire, and most people spend their entire lives locked inside it without ever realizing the key is in their own hand. Seneca, one of Rome's wealthiest men, understood this paradox intimately. He wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, who is poor." This wasn't philosophical posturing from someone who didn't understand material struggle. It was hard-won wisdom from someone who had everything the world could offer and discovered that everything wasn't enough. The cruel mathematics of desire work against you in ways that seem designed to ensure perpetual dissatisfaction. When you get what you want, the pleasure is always temporary. The promotion you worked years to achieve feels good for days or weeks, then becomes the new baseline. The relationship you longed for becomes familiar, ordinary, something you take for granted. The house you saved for becomes just where you live, no longer a source of joy but a collection of problems to maintain. But when you don't get what you want, the dissatisfaction is immediate and intense. The job rejection stings for months. The romantic disappointment creates lasting wounds. The financial setback becomes a source of ongoing anxiety. The system is rigged. Temporary pleasure for getting what you want, lasting pain for not getting it. This wouldn't be so devastating if desires were finite, if you could satisfy them all and then live in contentment. But desires are like a hydra. Cut off one head and two more appear. Achieve financial security and you want freedom. Gain freedom and you want purpose. Find purpose and you want recognition. Receive recognition and you want deeper meaning. Find meaning and you want transcendence. There is no end to the wanting, because wanting itself has become your identity. Consider how the modern world amplifies this prison. Advertising exists specifically to create dissatisfaction with what you have. Social media provides an endless parade of others who seem to have more, do more, experience more. The economy depends on your perpetual consumption, your constant feeling that what you have isn't enough. You're surrounded by messages designed to convince you that happiness is always one purchase away. But the deepest prison isn't created by external forces. It's created by your own mind's inability to distinguish between wants and needs. You confuse temporary preferences with essential requirements. You treat desires as emergencies. You experience the gap between what you have and what you want as a crisis requiring immediate resolution. The person who must have the perfect job can't appreciate the adequate job they have. The person who demands the ideal relationship can't enjoy the imperfect but genuine connection available to them. The person who needs more money can't feel grateful for the security they possess. Desire doesn't just prevent satisfaction, it actively destroys the capacity for satisfaction. This is why winning the lottery rarely creates lasting happiness. The windfall temporarily satisfies financial desires, but it doesn't address the underlying mechanism that creates desire. Soon enough, new wants emerge to fill the space left by the old ones. The problem isn't insufficient resources, it's insatiable appetite. The Stoics discovered that the only way to escape the prison of desire is to stop feeding it. This doesn't mean becoming passive or ceasing to work toward goals. It means learning to engage with life from a place of sufficiency rather than deficiency, from gratitude rather than grasping, from choice rather than compulsion. When you truly internalize that you already have enough, not everything you want, but enough to live well, something fundamental shifts. You can pursue goals without being driven by them. You can appreciate improvements without being dependent on them. You can engage with opportunities without being enslaved by outcomes. This shift requires recognizing that most of what you think you need is actually what you've been conditioned to want. The designer clothes, the luxury car, the impressive title, the perfect body, the exotic vacation. Strip away the cultural programming and ask yourself, do these things actually improve your capacity to think clearly, love deeply, create meaningfully, or live courageously? Or are they just expensive distractions from the real work of being human? The practice of voluntary discomfort, what the Stoics called living below your means, reveals how little you actually need to be content. Sleep on the floor occasionally, eat simple food, wear ordinary clothes, walk instead of driving, spend time alone without entertainment. These experiences aren't about deprivation. They're about discovering that most of your supposed needs are manufactured dependencies. When you realize you can be happy with less, you discover that you have more than enough. When you stop needing things to be different, you can appreciate them as they are. When you release the compulsion to acquire, you can enjoy what you possess. When you escape the prison of desire, you find yourself in the palace of presence. But this prison has guards: fear of missing out, social pressure, unconscious programming, the ego's need to prove itself through accumulation. These guards will tell you that wanting less means being less, that contentment equals complacency, that accepting what you have means giving up on growth. These are lies designed to keep you imprisoned. The person who has escaped desire doesn't stop growing. They grow more effectively because they're not scattered across 1,000 wants. They don't stop achieving. They achieve more meaningful things because they're not chasing every shiny object. They don't become passive. They become purposeful, directing their energy toward what actually matters rather than what merely glitters. The brutal truth about desire is that satisfying it is impossible because it's not actually about getting things. It's about the getting itself. You're addicted to the chase, not the capture. You're hooked on the hoping, not the having. You've confused the temporary biochemical rush of anticipation with genuine fulfillment. Breaking this addiction requires withdrawal, and withdrawal is uncomfortable. You'll feel restless, anxious, empty when you stop constantly reaching for more. This discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that something is finally being healed. The emptiness you feel when you stop filling it with desires is not a void to be feared, but a space to be inhabited. In that space, you'll discover what you actually are when you're not constantly trying to become something else. You'll find peace when you stop seeking it elsewhere. You'll experience abundance when you stop measuring it by external standards. The prison of desire has no locks, no walls, no guards except the ones you maintain through your own thinking. The moment you stop believing that happiness exists somewhere else, in something else, through someone else, that moment you discover it was available all along, right here, right now, in this ordinary, imperfect, sufficient life you're already living. But you have to stop running toward the horizon to see the ground beneath your feet. You will die. Not someday, not eventually, not in the distant future when you're old and ready. You will die, and it could happen today. This fact, which you know intellectually but refuse to accept emotionally, shapes every anxiety, drives every desperate pursuit, underlies every attempt to create permanent security in an impermanent world. Your fear of death isn't just about dying, it's about living, because the terror of mortality infects every moment you're alive. Marcus Aurelius counseled, "You came from nothing and will return to nothing. What have you lost?" But this question, meant to bring comfort, often brings horror instead. Because if you came from nothing and return to nothing, what does anything matter? If your consciousness, this precious, unique, irreplaceable awareness that seems to be the center of the universe, will simply cease, then what's the point of any effort, any love, any struggle? This is the existential crisis that most people spend their lives avoiding. We construct elaborate defenses against mortality. We exercise obsessively to delay it, accumulate wealth to create the illusion of security, build legacies to outlast it, follow religions that promise to transcend it. We live as if death were a problem to be solved rather than a fact to be accepted. But every defense against death becomes a defense against life. When you're terrified of dying, you become terrified of truly living. Risk becomes unbearable because risk acknowledges mortality. Vulnerability becomes impossible because vulnerability admits fragility. Presence becomes elusive because the present moment is where death always finds you. Watch how the fear of death manifests in daily life. The obsession with safety that prevents adventure. The accumulation of possessions that creates the illusion of permanence. The desperate need for control that exhausts you with anxiety. The paralysis when facing major decisions because choosing one path means losing another. The inability to love fully because loving completely means accepting the inevitable loss of what you love. The middle-aged person who suddenly realizes half their life is over and panics about wasted time, but then wastes more time panicking. The young person who believes they're immortal but lives in constant anxiety about everything that could go wrong. The elderly person who clings to life so desperately they forget to live it. all driven by the same fundamental terror, the recognition that this existence is temporary and there's nothing you can do about it. But what if this terror is based on a misunderstanding? What if the fear of death is actually fear of not having lived? What if the anxiety about ending is really anxiety about not having begun? What if mortality isn't the enemy of a meaningful life, but the source of its urgency and preciousness? Consider how differently you'd live if you truly accepted that you're dying. Not morbidly, not obsessively, but simply factually. If you knew you had 1 year left, would you spend it worried about your reputation? If you had 1 month, would you waste it on resentment? If you had 1 day, would you squander it on trivial anxieties? The Stoic practice of memento mori, remembering death, isn't meant to make you morbid, but to make you alive. When you accept mortality, you stop postponing life. When you embrace impermanence, you start appreciating what's temporary. When you make peace with ending, you can begin engaging with what's present. Death reveals what matters and what doesn't. In the face of mortality, most of your daily concerns become obviously trivial. The promotion you're stressed about, the slight from a colleague, the perfect vacation, the social media argument, all of it shrinks to its proper size when viewed from the perspective of limited time. But death also reveals what doesn't diminish in the face of mortality: love, beauty, truth, courage, kindness, growth. These don't become less important when you remember you're dying. They become more important. They don't lose meaning in the face of impermanence. They gain urgency. The person who has truly accepted their mortality doesn't become reckless or nihilistic. They become free. Free from the endless anxiety of trying to avoid the unavoidable. Free from the exhausting effort of pretending permanence is possible. Free from the desperate accumulation of security against an insecure world. This freedom allows for a different kind of engagement with life. When you're not spending energy on the impossible task of avoiding death, you can invest that energy in the possible task of living fully. When you're not postponing everything until you feel secure, you can engage with insecurity as the permanent condition of existence. The brutal honesty about death forces an equally brutal honesty about life. If you're going to die anyway, why are you waiting to do what matters to you? If your time is limited anyway, why are you spending it on things that don't align with your values? If security is impossible anyway, why are you sacrificing adventure for safety? But accepting mortality isn't just about changing how you live, it's about changing how you see. When you truly internalize your temporary nature, you begin to see the temporary nature of everything else. Your problems, your circumstances, your feelings, your relationships. This too shall pass becomes not just a consolation, but a liberation. The job you hate? Temporary. The pain you're experiencing? Temporary. The conflict in your relationship? Temporary. The financial stress? Temporary. The political crisis? Temporary. This doesn't minimize these challenges, but it puts them in perspective. They're chapters in your story, not the entire book, and the book itself has a limited number of pages. This perspective brings both humility and courage. Humility because you realize how small your part is in the vast drama of existence. Courage because you realize how precious your part is precisely because it's so brief and unrepeatable. The fear of death often masquerades as love of life, but it's actually the opposite. When you're terrified of dying, you can't fully live. When you're constantly worried about what you might lose, you can't fully appreciate what you have. When you're desperate to make your mark on eternity, you miss the mark you could make on today. But when you make peace with impermanence, you discover what the Stoics knew, that mortality doesn't diminish life's meaning, it concentrates it. Every moment becomes more precious because there are a finite number of them. Every relationship becomes more valuable because it won't last forever. Every experience becomes more vivid because you won't have infinite opportunities to repeat it. The meditation on death isn't preparation for dying, it's preparation for living. Because until you accept that your time is limited, you'll keep acting as if you have forever. Until you embrace your mortality, you'll keep postponing your vitality. Until you stop fearing the end, you can't fully embrace the middle. Death is not the opposite of life. It's the deadline that gives life its structure, its urgency, its meaning. It's the frame that makes the picture possible, the silence that makes the music audible, the space that makes the dance visible. You are dying, and this is the most important fact about your existence. Not because it makes life meaningless, but because it makes life mean everything. Not because it should terrify you, but because it should liberate you. The question isn't whether you'll die, you will. The question is whether you'll live before you do. Freedom is not free, and the price is higher than most people are willing to pay. It costs your illusions, your excuses, your blame, your victim stories, your need for approval, your comfort zones, your unconscious patterns, your ego's demands, and your desperate clinging to security. Most people, when they see the actual price tag, decide that freedom is too expensive and settle for the familiar prison of their own limitations. But here's what they don't understand. You're already paying a price. The price of unfreedom is your vitality, your authenticity, your peace of mind, your capacity for joy, your ability to love fully, and your potential for growth. You're trading your sovereignty for security, your truth for acceptance, your power for comfort. And unlike the cost of freedom, which you pay once and own forever, the cost of unfreedom is paid daily, hourly, with every compromise and every surrender. True freedom begins with the recognition that no one is coming to save you. Not your parents, not your partner, not your government, not your therapist, not your guru, not your God. You are the only person with both the responsibility and the capability to create the life you want to live. This recognition is simultaneously terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it strips away all your external supports. Liberating because it reveals your own power. The Stoics understood that external freedom, political, economic, social, is ultimately illusory. Epictetus knew this intimately, having lived as a slave who was internally freer than most free men. No one can hurt you without your permission, he taught, not as philosophical abstraction, but as lived reality. He had discovered what every free person discovers, that the only freedom that cannot be taken from you is the freedom to choose your response to whatever circumstances you face. But this internal freedom demands brutal self-honesty about where you've been surrendering your power. Every time you blame someone else for your circumstances, you give them control over your life. Every time you wait for permission to pursue what matters to you, you make yourself a child waiting for parental approval. Every time you allow fear to dictate your choices, you become fear's slave rather than your own master. Look at the ways you've been enslaving yourself. You stay in relationships that drain you because leaving would be uncomfortable. You remain in jobs that kill your soul because change involves risk. You suppress your authentic thoughts because expressing them might create conflict. You follow other people's expectations because disappointing them feels unbearable. You avoid challenging conversations because confrontation makes you anxious. Each of these choices seems reasonable in isolation, but together they form a pattern of voluntary servitude. You've become so accustomed to avoiding discomfort that you've forgotten how to choose difficulty in service of growth. You've become so skilled at managing other people's emotions that you've lost touch with your own. You've become so practiced at meeting external expectations that you no longer know what you actually want. The cost of this pattern is enormous, but it's paid gradually so you don't notice the accumulation. Day by day, choice by choice, compromise by compromise, you give away pieces of yourself until you wake up one day wondering who you've become and how you got there. You look in the mirror and see a stranger, someone who looks like you but seems to be living someone else's life. True freedom requires taking back this power you've been surrendering. It means accepting responsibility not just for your actions, but for your reactions, not just for your choices, but for your emotional responses to your circumstances. It means recognizing that while you cannot control what happens to you, you can always control what happens within you. But this level of responsibility is overwhelming for most people. It's easier to believe that your unhappiness is caused by your difficult boss, your demanding family, your challenging circumstances, your past trauma, your current limitations. It's simpler to focus on changing others rather than changing yourself, to demand that the world accommodate you rather than learning to navigate the world as it is. The path to freedom requires abandoning these comfortable delusions. It means accepting that your emotional state is your responsibility, that your life circumstances are largely the result of your choices, that your relationships reflect your patterns, that your external world mirrors your internal world. This acceptance doesn't deny the reality of injustice, trauma, or genuine external obstacles. It simply recognizes that your response to these realities determines their power over you. Freedom also costs your need for approval. As long as you require other people's validation to feel okay about yourself, you remain dependent on their opinions, moods, and preferences. You become a prisoner of their perception, constantly adjusting your behavior to maintain their positive regard. True freedom means being willing to be disliked, misunderstood, criticized, or rejected while still maintaining your integrity and pursuing your values. This doesn't mean becoming callous or indifferent to others' feelings. It means distinguishing between consideration and compliance, between kindness and people-pleasing, between love and dependency. It means being able to say no when no is the honest answer, to speak truth when truth is needed, to set boundaries when boundaries are necessary, even when these choices make others uncomfortable. The cost of freedom includes your victim stories, the narratives you've constructed about how life has wronged you, how others have failed you, how circumstances have conspired against you. These stories may be factually accurate, but they become chains when you use them to explain your current limitations rather than your past experiences. Freedom requires moving from "this happened to me, therefore I cannot," to "this happened to me, and here's how I choose to respond." Freedom demands emotional regulation, the ability to experience feelings without being controlled by them. This means developing the capacity to feel anger without becoming aggressive, to experience fear without becoming paralyzed, to encounter disappointment without becoming cynical, to face loss without becoming bitter. It means learning to surf emotional waves rather than being tumbled by them. Perhaps most costly of all, freedom requires giving up the comfortable stories about why you cannot change, why your circumstances are fixed, why your personality is immutable, why your past determines your future. These stories feel protective because they excuse you from the difficult work of growth, but they also keep you trapped in patterns that no longer serve you. The person who pays the full price of freedom discovers something remarkable, that the cost was worth it, not because life becomes easier, but because it becomes authentic. Problems don't disappear, but they become your problems to solve rather than evidence of your victimhood. Challenges don't vanish, but they become opportunities for growth rather than proof of life's unfairness. Relationships don't become perfect, but they become real rather than performances. Freedom is not the absence of constraints. It's the conscious choice of which constraints to accept. The free person chooses their struggles rather than having struggles imposed upon them. They choose their responsibilities rather than avoiding all responsibility. They choose their values rather than inheriting others' expectations. But this choice must be made daily, hourly, moment by moment. Freedom is not a destination you reach, but a practice you maintain. It requires constant vigilance against the tendency to slip back into blame, excuse-making, people-pleasing, and victimhood. It demands ongoing courage to face discomfort rather than avoiding it, to speak truth rather than telling people what they want to hear, to take responsibility rather than finding someone else to blame. The brutal truth about freedom is that most people don't want it badly enough to pay its price. They want the benefits of freedom, authenticity, peace, power, joy, without the costs. They want to be free while still maintaining their excuses, keeping their victim stories, avoiding difficult conversations, and staying in their comfort zones. But freedom doesn't work that way. You cannot be partially free any more than you can be partially honest or partially pregnant. Freedom is a binary choice that must be made completely or not at all. The question is not whether you deserve freedom. You do. The question is whether you want it more than you want the familiar prison of your limitations, whether you're willing to trade security for sovereignty, comfort for authenticity, approval for integrity. The door to your cage has always been unlocked. The question is whether you're brave enough to open it. The moment you realize that no one is coming to save you is the moment you can begin saving yourself. This realization is simultaneously devastating and liberating. Devastating because it destroys the comforting illusion that someone else is responsible for your life. Liberating because it returns to you the power to shape your existence. But this power comes with a weight that most people find unbearable. The full burden of responsibility for your choices, your responses, your circumstances, and your character. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote, "We are condemned to be free," meaning that even refusing to choose is itself a choice. Even denying responsibility is an act of responsibility. You cannot escape the burden of creating yourself through your decisions, moment by moment, day by day, year by year. Every action you take, every word you speak, every thought you entertain contributes to the person you're becoming. There is no neutral ground, no timeouts, no breaks from the relentless task of self-creation. This responsibility extends far beyond your obvious choices. You're responsible not just for what you do, but for how you interpret what happens to you. You're responsible not just for your actions, but for your reactions. You're responsible not just for your words, but for the emotions that drive them. You're responsible not just for your successes, but for how you handle your failures. The scope is comprehensive and inescapable. Most people spend enormous energy trying to escape this burden. They blame their parents for their personality, their circumstances for their choices, their past for their present, their genetics for their behavior, their culture for their values, their upbringing for their limitations. They construct elaborate explanations for why they are the way they are, as if understanding the causes somehow eliminates the responsibility for change. But explanation is not excuse. Understanding why you developed certain patterns doesn't absolve you of the responsibility to change them. Recognizing how your past shaped you doesn't mean your past determines you. Acknowledging external influences doesn't transfer responsibility for your life to those influences. You remain the author of your story, even if you didn't choose all the circumstances in which the story unfolds. Watch how differently people respond to identical situations. Two people face job loss. One sees opportunity for growth and reinvention. The other sees confirmation of their inadequacy and the world's unfairness. Two people experience relationship breakups. One uses it as motivation for self-reflection and improvement. The other uses it as evidence that love is impossible and trust is foolish. Two people encounter serious illness. One finds deeper appreciation for life and relationships. The other becomes bitter about the randomness and cruelty of existence. The external circumstances are the same. The responses are completely different. This difference doesn't come from personality, luck, or circumstances. It comes from the degree to which each person accepts responsibility for their internal experience. The person who takes full responsibility for their response has options. The person who attributes their response to external forces has only one option: waiting for external forces to change. Taking full responsibility doesn't mean blaming yourself for everything that happens. It means acknowledging that while you cannot control all the events in your life, you can always control your response to those events. It means recognizing that your emotional state, your perspective, your choices, and your character development are your responsibility, regardless of what external factors influence their formation. This distinction is crucial because without it, responsibility becomes self-torture rather than self-empowerment. You are not responsible for being born into dysfunction, but you are responsible for healing from it. You are not responsible for being traumatized, but you are responsible for your recovery. You are not responsible for others' actions toward you, but you are responsible for your reactions to their actions. The burden of responsibility includes accepting that your problems are yours to solve, even if you didn't create them. Your difficult childhood is your healing work to do. Your financial struggles are your solutions to find. Your relationship conflicts are your patterns to address. Your career dissatisfaction is your choices to make. Your emotional turbulence is your regulation to develop. This doesn't mean you must solve everything alone. Seeking help, advice, therapy, mentorship, or support is often a responsible choice. But it means recognizing that even when others help you, you remain responsible for seeking that help, implementing the advice, doing the work, and maintaining the progress. No one else can do your healing, growth, or development for you. The weight of this responsibility can feel overwhelming, especially when you first fully grasp its scope. You might feel crushed by the recognition that every aspect of your life, your happiness, your relationships, your success, your peace of mind, your character, ultimately depends on choices you make. The temptation to retreat into blame, excuse-making, and victimhood can be intense. But this overwhelm comes from trying to take responsibility for everything at once, rather than recognizing that responsibility is exercised one choice at a time, one moment at a time, one day at a time. You don't have to fix your entire life today. You only have to make one responsible choice right now, and then another, and then another. The person who embraces full responsibility discovers something remarkable, that taking responsibility for problems gives you power to solve them, while avoiding responsibility for problems leaves you powerless to change them. When you blame external circumstances for your unhappiness, you have to wait for external circumstances to change before you can be happy. When you accept responsibility for your unhappiness, you can begin working on happiness immediately. This shift from external locus of control to internal locus of control transforms everything. Instead of being a victim of your circumstances, you become the architect of your response to your circumstances. Instead of being powerless against external forces, you become powerful through internal choice. Instead of waiting for the world to change, you start changing yourself. But responsibility also requires acknowledging the full scope of your influence. You're responsible not just for your obvious choices, but for your unconscious patterns, not just for your intentional actions, but for your habitual reactions, not just for your direct words, but for the energy and emotion behind them. You're responsible for the ripple effects of your behavior, the impact of your presence, the consequences of your choices on others. This extended responsibility can feel burdensome because it means you cannot simply focus on your own immediate desires and ignore how your choices affect others. You must consider not just what you want, but what serves the larger good. Not just what feels good in the moment, but what creates positive long-term consequences. Not just what benefits you, but what contributes to the well-being of those around you. The Stoics understood that true responsibility includes responsibility to others, to community, to society, to future generations. Marcus Aurelius, despite having absolute power, constantly reminded himself of his duty to serve the common good. This wasn't self-sacrifice, but enlightened self-interest, recognizing that individual well-being is ultimately inseparable from collective well-being. Taking full responsibility also means accepting that you are responsible for becoming the kind of person others can depend on. This includes developing reliability, integrity, emotional stability, and the capacity to keep commitments even when they become inconvenient. It means being someone others can trust, not just in big moments, but in small daily interactions. Perhaps the heaviest aspect of responsibility is accepting that you are responsible for your own character development. No one else can make you honest, kind, courageous, or wise. These qualities must be cultivated through your own choices, practiced through your own actions, strengthened through your own discipline. You cannot inherit character, buy it, or receive it as a gift. You can only earn it through repeated responsible choices. The brutal truth about responsibility is that it never ends and never lessens. As you grow and develop, you become capable of greater responsibility, which means life offers you greater challenges, more complex choices, more significant consequences. The burden doesn't get lighter, you get stronger at carrying it. But this increasing capacity to bear responsibility is what transforms you from a child into an adult, from a victim into a creator, from someone who happens to life into someone to whom life happens. The weight of responsibility, fully accepted, doesn't crush you. It forges you into someone capable of handling whatever life presents. The question is not whether you want this responsibility. You have it, whether you want it or not. The question is whether you'll acknowledge it and use it to create the life and the person you want to become, or whether you'll deny it and remain forever at the mercy of forces you refuse to recognize as your own choices. No one is coming to save you. This is the most terrifying and most liberating truth you will ever face. Terrifying because it strips away all illusions of external rescue. Liberating because it reveals that the power to create change has been in your hands all along. There comes a moment in every life when you must choose between resignation and rebellion, between surrendering to circumstances and fighting for something better, between accepting defeat and igniting the fire within that refuses to be extinguished. This moment might come disguised as a crisis, a loss, a failure, or simply the slow recognition that the life you're living is not the life you meant to live. But when it arrives, you will face the most important choice you'll ever make, whether to let life break you or to let it forge you. The fire within is not anger, though anger may kindle it. It's not rage, though rage may fuel it. It's not even passion, though passion may express it. The fire within is something deeper. It's the indestructible core of your being that remains undaunted by any external force, the part of you that can look at overwhelming odds and say, "Even so, I continue." It's what the Stoics called the citadel of the self, the fortress that no siege can breach, the light that no darkness can extinguish. But this fire doesn't burn by accident. It must be consciously lit, carefully tended, and deliberately protected from the forces that would smother it. These forces are everywhere. The voice that tells you to be realistic, the comfort that makes you soft, the fear that makes you small, the criticism that makes you doubt, the failure that makes you quit, the pain that makes you bitter, the injustice that makes you cynical. Epictetus knew this fire intimately. Born into slavery, physically disabled, stripped of every external freedom, he could have easily let his circumstances extinguish any spark of dignity or hope. Instead, he discovered that the harder life pressed against him, the brighter his inner flame burned. Difficulties show men what they are, he taught. In case of any difficulty, remember that God has pitted you against a rough antagonist, that you may be a victor, and this cannot be without toil. The fire within reveals itself differently in different people. For some, it's quiet determination that persists long after others have given up. For others, it's fierce creativity that refuses to be constrained by conventional limitations. For some, it's relentless optimism that finds possibility in the most hopeless situations. For others, it's stubborn integrity that won't compromise core values regardless of consequences. But in every case, the fire within is characterized by the same essential quality. It cannot be controlled by external circumstances. It burns regardless of whether you're rich or poor, healthy or sick, praised or criticized, successful or failing. It's the part of you that remains you no matter what happens to you. This fire is what allows some people to find meaning in meaningless situations, to create beauty in ugly circumstances, to maintain dignity in degrading conditions, to love in the face of hatred, to hope despite having every reason to despair. It's what enables the prisoner to remain free in spirit, the poor person to be rich in character, the rejected person to maintain self-worth, the defeated person to plan for victory. But the fire within must be distinguished from mere stubbornness or denial. Stubbornness refuses to accept reality. The fire within accepts reality completely and then chooses how to respond to it. Denial ignores circumstances. The fire within faces circumstances directly and finds a way to work with them. Stubbornness is rigid. The fire within is adaptable. Denial is fragile. The fire within is anti-fragile. It grows stronger under pressure. Consider what happens when this fire is absent. Without it, you become reactive rather than responsive, victim rather than victor, passenger rather than pilot. You let circumstances determine your emotional state. Other people's opinions determine your self-worth. External events determine your internal experience. You become like a leaf blown by whatever wind happens to be blowing, with no capacity to choose your direction or maintain your course. But when the fire within burns bright, you become what Nassim Taleb calls anti-fragile. Not just able to survive stress and chaos, but able to grow stronger because of them. Obstacles become training. Setbacks become setups for comebacks. Failures become education. Criticism becomes information. Pain becomes strength. Loss becomes wisdom. This transformation doesn't happen automatically. It requires a conscious choice to interpret adversity as opportunity rather than as evidence of victimhood. It requires developing what Viktor Frankl called the last of human freedoms. The ability to choose your attitude in any given set of circumstances. It requires cultivating what the Stoics called the discipline of desire, wanting what happens rather than demanding that what you want happens. The fire within is fed by purpose, not pleasure. It burns brightest when you're working towards something meaningful rather than simply seeking something enjoyable. This is why people often discover their deepest strength during their darkest times. Crisis strips away superficial pleasures and forces you to connect with what truly matters. But purpose alone isn't enough to sustain the fire. It must be combined with what the Stoics called discipline, the consistent choice to act according to your values rather than your impulses, to pursue what's important rather than what's easy, to build character rather than simply accumulate experiences. This discipline manifests in countless small daily choices: getting up when you don't feel like it, doing the work when it's difficult, keeping commitments when they're inconvenient, treating people well when they don't deserve it, pursuing growth when it's uncomfortable, maintaining hope when it seems unreasonable. Each of these choices adds fuel to the fire within. Each compromised choice dampens it. This is why character is built through habit rather than through intention, because the fire within is maintained through consistent action, not occasional inspiration. The person whose fire burns bright becomes a different kind of human being. They develop what the ancient Greeks called ataraxia, unshakable tranquility that comes not from avoiding disturbance, but from maintaining inner stability regardless of external turbulence. They possess what the Romans called virtus, strength that expresses itself not through domination of others, but through mastery of self. But perhaps most importantly, they develop the capacity to light this fire in others. The person who has found their own inner flame becomes a beacon for those still searching for theirs. They demonstrate that resilience is possible, that meaning can be found in suffering, that dignity can be maintained in any circumstances, that the human spirit is ultimately unconquerable. This is the final gift of the fire within. It spreads, not through preaching or teaching, but through example. When others see someone who refuses to be broken by life's hardships, who maintains integrity despite pressure to compromise, who finds strength in struggle rather than being weakened by it, they begin to believe that such strength might be possible for them too. The brutal truth about the fire within is that life will test it, repeatedly, relentlessly, without mercy. The tests will come in forms you don't expect, at times when you feel least prepared, with intensity that seems designed to overwhelm your capacity to respond. But these tests are not punishments. They are opportunities to discover just how bright your flame can burn. Every time you choose courage over comfort, growth over safety, integrity over expedience, purpose over pleasure, you add fuel to this fire. Every time you refuse to let circumstances determine your character, refuse to let others' behavior determine your behavior, refuse to let external events determine your internal state, the flame burns brighter. The fire within cannot be given to you by others, but it cannot be taken from you by others either. It cannot be purchased, but it cannot be stolen. It cannot be inherited, but it cannot be destroyed. It can only be lit by your own choice and maintained by your own discipline. The question is not whether you have this fire. You do. The question is whether you'll choose to kindle it or let it remain dormant. Whether you'll feed it with purpose and discipline or let it be smothered by comfort and compromise. Whether you'll use it to forge yourself into something stronger or let life's pressures crush you into something smaller. Because in the end, that's what separates those who thrive from those who merely survive. Not their circumstances, but their response to circumstances. Not what happens to them, but what they choose to do with what happens to them. Not the fire life throws at them, but the fire they kindle within themselves. And once that fire is burning bright, nothing, absolutely nothing, can extinguish it except your own choice to let it die. In the eye of every hurricane lies perfect stillness. While winds rage at hundreds of miles per hour, while debris flies and structures collapse, while chaos reigns in every direction, there exists a space of absolute calm. This space is not an absence of the storm. It's surrounded by the storm, defined by the storm, made possible by the storm. And within you, no matter how chaotic your external circumstances become, there exists this same space of unshakable stillness. The world will always be in turmoil. Markets will crash and recover. Relationships will form and dissolve. Health will flourish and fail. Jobs will come and go. People will love you and disappoint you, praise you and criticize you, understand you and misunderstand you. News cycles will deliver an endless stream of crises, conflicts and catastrophes. Social media will assault you with a constant barrage of opinions, outrage and anxiety. The external world, by its very nature, is turbulent. But the Stoics discovered something remarkable. This external chaos need not create internal chaos. Marcus Aurelius, governing an empire in constant crisis, wrote in his personal journal, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He was not writing from a peaceful retreat, but from military campaigns, political upheavals and personal tragedies. He found stillness, not by avoiding the storm, but by finding the I within it. This stillness is not indifference, it's clarity. It's not numbness, it's presence. It's not detachment from life, it's engagement with life from a place of centered awareness rather than reactive emotion. When you operate from this stillness, you see situations more clearly, respond more wisely, and act more effectively than when you're swept up in the emotional turbulence that chaos naturally generates. Watch someone who has cultivated this inner stillness during a crisis. While others panic, they assess. While others react emotionally, they respond thoughtfully. While others are paralyzed by uncertainty, they take measured action. They're not unaffected by the situation. They're affected differently. They feel the weight of circumstances without being crushed by it. Acknowledge the difficulty without being overwhelmed by it. Face the uncertainty without being paralyzed by it. This stillness is cultivated through practice, not granted through circumstances. It's developed by repeatedly choosing conscious response over automatic reaction, by consistently returning to breath and awareness when emotions threaten to overwhelm reason, by regularly stepping back from the immediate drama to gain broader perspective. The practice begins with recognition, noticing when you're being pulled into the chaos around you. Your heart rate increases, your thinking becomes scattered, your emotions intensify, your perspective narrows. These are signals that you're losing your center, getting swept up in the storm rather than remaining in the eye of it. The next step is pause, creating space between stimulus and response. This space might be as brief as a single conscious breath, or as extended as stepping away from the situation entirely. The length matters less than the intention, to interrupt the automatic pattern of reactive chaos and create room for conscious choice. Within this pause, you access perspective, the ability to see the current situation within a larger context. This crisis, this conflict, this disappointment, this setback, how will it matter in a year, in 5 years, in the grand scheme of your entire life? Not to minimize genuine difficulties, but to right-size them, to see them clearly, rather than through the magnifying lens of immediate emotion. From perspective comes choice, the recognition that while you cannot control what's happening around you, you can always choose how you relate to what's happening around you. You can choose curiosity over anxiety, acceptance over resistance, learning over suffering, growth over stagnation, compassion over judgment, wisdom over reaction. This process, recognition, pause, perspective, choice, becomes automatic with practice, but it requires practice. It requires repeatedly choosing stillness over chaos, consciousness over reaction, wisdom over emotion. It requires developing what the Stoics called discipline of the mind, the capacity to direct your attention and energy according to your values rather than being driven by circumstances. The still person becomes like water, fluid enough to adapt to any container, yet retaining its essential nature regardless of its shape. They can be gentle when gentleness serves, firm when firmness is needed, patient when patience is required, decisive when action is called for. They respond to each situation with what it requires, rather than with what their habitual patterns dictate. This flexibility is possible because stillness reveals options that chaos obscures. When you're emotionally reactive, you see only a narrow range of responses, usually fight, flight, or freeze. When you're internally still, you see the full spectrum of possibilities, creative solutions, unexpected opportunities, third alternatives that neither aggression nor avoidance would discover. Stillness also reveals what truly matters and what doesn't. In the midst of emotional chaos, everything feels urgent, everything seems important, everything appears to require immediate attention. But from the perspective of stillness, priorities clarify. You can distinguish between what genuinely needs your attention and what's simply making noise. You can invest your energy in what you can influence and release your concern about what you cannot. This discernment is crucial because energy is finite and attention is limited. The person who tries to respond to every crisis, solve every problem, and address every concern quickly exhausts themselves without accomplishing anything meaningful. The person who operates from stillness can focus their efforts where they can actually make a difference. But perhaps most importantly, stillness becomes contagious. When you remain calm in chaotic situations, others begin to find their own calm. When you respond thoughtfully rather than reactively, Others have space to think rather than just react. When you embody peace in the midst of turmoil, you give others permission to find their own peace. This is not about suppressing emotions or pretending difficulties don't exist. It's about feeling emotions without being controlled by them, acknowledging difficulties without being defined by them, experiencing challenges without being overwhelmed by them. It's about maintaining your center, regardless of how much the world around you seems to be spinning out of control. The still person discovers that external chaos often appears worse than it actually is, because we add our own internal chaos to it. The job loss becomes not just a job loss, but evidence of personal inadequacy. The relationship conflict becomes not just a disagreement, but proof of fundamental incompatibility. The health issue becomes not just a medical challenge, but a catastrophic threat to everything we value. But when you remove the internal chaos, the catastrophic thinking, the emotional reactivity, the storytelling about what events mean, external chaos often resolves more easily. Problems that seemed insurmountable become manageable. Conflicts that appeared irreconcilable become workable. Challenges that felt overwhelming become opportunities for growth. This doesn't mean that all problems are easy to solve, or that maintaining inner stillness eliminates external difficulties. It means that approaching challenges from a place of internal stability gives you the best possible chance of addressing them effectively. It means that your response to difficulty doesn't add unnecessary suffering to unavoidable pain. The cultivation of stillness is perhaps the most practical spiritual practice possible. It doesn't require retreating from the world, but engaging with the world more skillfully. It doesn't demand special circumstances, but works within whatever circumstances exist. It doesn't depend on external validation, but creates its own internal validation. In a world that profits from your anxiety, choosing stillness is radical. In a culture that rewards reactivity, maintaining calm is revolutionary. In a time that celebrates busyness, embracing presence is transformative. Not because stillness changes external circumstances, but because it changes you, and when you change, your entire experience of circumstances changes. The eye of the hurricane is not separate from the storm. It's the still point around which the storm revolves. And the stillness within you is not separate from the chaos around you. It's the centered awareness that allows you to dance with chaos rather than being destroyed by it. This is the first gift of Stoic wisdom, the recognition that peace is always available, not as an escape from reality, but as a way of being fully present to reality without being overwhelmed by it. Compassion is not weakness disguised as virtue. It is strength expressing itself through understanding. This distinction matters because true compassion, the kind that heals rather than enables, that helps rather than harms, that serves rather than seeks approval, requires the same courage, wisdom, and inner fortitude that any authentic strength demands. The Stoics understood that rational love, compassion guided by wisdom rather than driven by emotion, is not the enemy of strength, but its highest expression. Marcus Aurelius, commander of legions and ruler of an empire, wrote, "Whenever you want to cheer yourself, consider the good qualities of your companions." This was not sentiment, but strategy, not weakness, but wisdom. He understood that seeing others clearly, including their struggles, their limitations, their humanity, was essential for effective leadership, meaningful relationships, and personal peace. But Stoic compassion is fundamentally different from what often passes for compassion in modern culture. It's not emotional contagion that absorbs others' suffering as your own. It's not enabling that prevents people from learning necessary lessons. It's not people-pleasing that sacrifices truth for comfort. It's not martyrdom that exhausts you in service of others' dysfunction. True compassion begins with understanding, seeing people as they are rather than as you wish they were, recognizing their behavior as the logical result of their beliefs and experiences rather than as evidence of their fundamental worth or lack thereof. When someone acts badly, rational compassion asks not, how could they, but what would lead someone to act this way? This understanding doesn't excuse harmful behavior or eliminate consequences. It simply recognizes that people operate according to their current level of awareness, their available resources, their learned patterns, and their perceived options. The person who acts cruelly often does so from their own pain. The person who lies frequently does so from fear. The person who manipulates others usually does so from powerlessness. Seeing this clearly doesn't make you naive. It makes you wise. When you understand the drivers behind behavior, you can respond more effectively. You can set appropriate boundaries without taking things personally. You can protect yourself without demonizing others. You can seek solutions rather than just assigning blame. Consider how different your relationships would be if you could see difficult people through the lens of understanding rather than judgment. The demanding boss who might be operating from insecurity about their own competence. The critical parent who might be projecting their own unfulfilled dreams. The inconsistent friend who might be struggling with issues you can't see. The challenging partner who might be acting from past wounds that have nothing to do with you. This perspective doesn't require you to accept mistreatment or ignore your own needs. It simply allows you to respond to people from a place of clarity rather than reactivity, wisdom rather than emotion, strength rather than defensiveness. When you understand that others' behavior is usually about them rather than about you, you can choose your response based on what serves the situation rather than what your hurt feelings demand. But compassion extends beyond understanding to action. Not action driven by guilt, obligation, or the need to be needed, but action guided by wisdom about what truly helps. Sometimes the most compassionate response is setting firm boundaries. Sometimes it's saying no to requests that would enable destructive patterns. Sometimes it's allowing people to experience the natural consequences of their choices rather than rescuing them from those consequences. The parent who refuses to continually bail out their adult child's financial irresponsibility is acting with compassion, even though it feels harsh. The friend who won't listen to endless complaints about problems the complainer refuses to address is showing compassion, even though it seems unsympathetic. The manager who holds employees accountable for their performance is expressing compassion, even though it creates discomfort. This type of compassion requires tremendous strength because it often involves disappointing people in service of their growth, saying difficult truths that need to be heard, and refusing to participate in dynamics that feel good in the moment but create harm over time. It requires the wisdom to distinguish between what people want and what they need, between what feels kind and what is truly helpful. Rational compassion also includes self-compassion, treating yourself with the same understanding you would offer a good friend facing similar circumstances. This means acknowledging your mistakes without crushing yourself with self-criticism, recognizing your limitations without using them as excuses, accepting your humanity without abandoning your commitment to growth. Self-compassion is not self-indulgence. It's not lowering standards or excusing poor choices. It's recognizing that beating yourself up for your failures doesn't improve your performance, that harsh self-criticism doesn't motivate positive change, that perfectionism doesn't lead to excellence. It's understanding that you need the same patience, understanding and encouragement you would offer others. The person who practices rational compassion becomes remarkably effective in relationships. They can remain calm during conflicts because they understand that others' anger usually has little to do with them. They can set boundaries without guilt because they recognize that boundaries serve everyone's best interests. They can offer help without becoming codependent because they distinguish between what truly helps and what merely enables. This effectiveness comes from operating from a place of fullness rather than neediness. When you're not desperate for approval, validation, or emotional regulation from others, you can engage with them more authentically. When you're not trying to fix, save, or control others, you can actually see them clearly and respond appropriately. But perhaps most importantly, rational compassion creates space for genuine connection. When people sense that you see them clearly without judgment, that you understand their struggles without trying to fix them, that you care about their well-being without needing them to be different than they are, they can relax into authenticity. They don't have to perform or pretend or hide their difficulties. This creates the conditions for real intimacy, not the superficial connection based on shared complaints or mutual enabling, but the deep connection that comes from being truly seen and accepted. It allows for relationships based on choice rather than need, growth rather than stagnation, mutual respect rather than emotional manipulation. The strength of compassion also extends to how you engage with the world's suffering. Rather than being overwhelmed by the endless stream of global crises, injustices, and tragedies that modern media delivers, you can channel your concern into meaningful action. Rather than spreading your anxiety thin across every problem you cannot solve, you can focus your efforts where you can actually make a difference. This doesn't mean becoming callous to suffering you cannot address. It means recognizing that your distress about distant problems doesn't help anyone and often prevents you from addressing problems within your sphere of influence. It means understanding that the best way to contribute to a better world is to become a better person, to heal your own patterns, to develop your own wisdom, to model the change you want to see. Rational compassion creates a sustainable way of caring that doesn't burn you out or break you down. It allows you to engage with suffering, your own and others, without being consumed by it. It enables you to help without becoming a martyr, to care without becoming codependent, to love without losing yourself. This is the second gift of Stoic wisdom, the recognition that true strength expresses itself through understanding, that real love serves growth rather than comfort, that genuine compassion requires the courage to see clearly and act wisely rather than just feel deeply. The person who embodies this strength of compassion becomes a force for healing in the world, not through grand gestures or dramatic sacrifices, but through the quiet power of seeing others clearly, responding wisely, and loving rationally. They become someone others can trust not just to care, but to care in ways that actually help. And in a world full of emotional reactivity, this rational love becomes revolutionary, not because it's cold or detached, but because it's warm and effective, not because it doesn't feel, but because it feels clearly enough to act wisely. Reality is not what happens to you. Reality is what you make of what happens to you. This distinction, which sounds like philosophical wordplay until you truly understand it, represents perhaps the most powerful tool available to human consciousness. Every event in your life is neutral until you interpret it. Every circumstance is meaningless until you assign it meaning. Every experience is just data until you decide what story to tell about it. The Stoics called this the discipline of perception, the practice of consciously choosing how to interpret events rather than being automatically controlled by your initial emotional reactions. Epictetus taught, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." But he wasn't suggesting that you should pretend bad things are good or that you should deny difficult realities. He was pointing to something more profound, that your experience of any event is determined far more by your interpretation of it than by the event itself. Consider two people who receive identical criticism from their supervisor. The first person interprets it as evidence of their inadequacy, proof that they're failing, confirmation that they don't belong in their role. They spend the rest of the day ruminating about their shortcomings, their future prospects, their fundamental worth as a person. The criticism becomes a source of ongoing suffering that affects their confidence, their performance, and their relationships. The second person interprets the same criticism as valuable information about how to improve, insight into their supervisor's expectations, data they can use to enhance their performance. They spend their energy figuring out how to implement the feedback rather than questioning their fundamental competence. The criticism becomes a tool for growth rather than a weapon for self-attack. The external event, the criticism, was identical. The internal experience was completely different. This difference didn't come from personality, circumstances, or luck. It came from perspective, the conscious choice about how to frame what happened. This power of perspective extends to every aspect of human experience. The job loss that one person experiences as catastrophic failure, another experiences as liberation from an unsatisfying role. The relationship ending that one person sees as evidence of their unlovability, another sees as an opportunity to learn about compatibility and communication. The illness that one person interprets as cruel randomness, another interprets as a reminder of life's preciousness and fragility. But perspective is not about positive thinking or forcing yourself to see everything as good. It's about choosing the most useful interpretation, the frame that best serves your well-being, your growth, your ability to respond effectively. Sometimes the most useful perspective acknowledges genuine loss, real difficulty, or significant challenge while still maintaining your capacity to learn, adapt, and continue moving forward. The practice of conscious perspective-taking requires first recognizing that your initial interpretation of events is not the only possible interpretation. It's just the first one your mind generated, usually based on past experiences, current fears, or habitual patterns. This recognition creates space for choice, room to consider alternative ways of understanding what happened. This space is crucial because your first interpretation is often the least useful one. It's typically driven by emotion rather than wisdom, fear rather than curiosity, past conditioning rather than present possibility. The interpretation that serves your growth, your peace of mind, and your effectiveness usually requires conscious choice rather than automatic reaction. The power of perspective becomes especially important during difficult times. When facing loss, failure, rejection, or trauma, your mind will naturally generate interpretations that increase suffering, telling stories about what these events mean about you, your future, your worth, your safety. But these interpretations, while natural, are not inevitable or accurate. They're just one way of making sense of what happened. Alternative perspectives don't deny the reality of difficulty, but change your relationship to that difficulty. The failure becomes education rather than condemnation. The loss becomes an opportunity to discover your resilience rather than evidence of life's cruelty. The rejection becomes redirection rather than personal inadequacy. The trauma becomes a source of strength rather than permanent damage. This reframing is not self-deception. It's conscious choice about which aspects of complex events to focus on. Every difficult experience contains multiple truths: loss and growth, pain and learning, endings and beginnings, destruction and opportunity. Perspective is about choosing which truth to emphasize, which story to tell, which meaning to extract. Modern psychology has validated what the Stoics understood 2,000 years ago: that cognitive reframing, consciously changing how you think about events, is one of the most effective tools for emotional regulation, stress management, and psychological well-being. Cognitive behavioral therapy is essentially applied Stoicism, helping people recognize that their thoughts about events, not the events themselves, determine their emotional experience. But the power of perspective extends beyond managing difficult experiences to enhancing positive ones. The person who interprets success as evidence of their worth becomes anxious about maintaining that success. The person who interprets success as the result of effort, learning, and favorable circumstances can enjoy it without being attached to it, learn from it without being defined by it. The practice of perspective taking becomes easier with repetition. Start with small events, traffic delays, minor inconveniences, everyday frustrations. Instead of automatically interpreting these as problems, experiment with alternative frames. The traffic delay becomes unexpected time for reflection. The inconvenience becomes an opportunity to practice patience. The frustration becomes information about your attachment to things being a certain way. As you develop facility with conscious perspective taking in small situations, you can apply it to larger challenges. The skill of reframing becomes a habit, then a natural capacity, then an automatic response to difficulty. You begin to see that every event, no matter how challenging, offers multiple ways of being understood. This doesn't mean that all perspectives are equally valid or useful. Some interpretations serve your growth and well-being, others increase suffering and limit possibilities. The goal is not to convince yourself that everything is good, but to choose the interpretation that best serves your ability to learn, grow, and respond effectively. The person who masters the power of perspective becomes remarkably resilient, not because nothing difficult happens to them, but because they've learned to extract wisdom from difficulty, to find opportunities within obstacles, to discover strength through struggle. They develop what psychologists call post-traumatic growth, the capacity to become stronger, wiser, and more compassionate as a result of challenging experiences. But perhaps most importantly, conscious perspective taking reveals that you have far more control over your experience than you initially realized. While you cannot control what happens to you, you can always influence what you make of what happens to you. While you cannot determine your circumstances, you can always choose your interpretation of those circumstances. This recognition transforms you from a victim of events to an author of meaning. Instead of being buffeted by whatever interpretations your mind automatically generates, you become the conscious creator of your own understanding. Instead of being at the mercy of circumstances, you become the master of perspective. The third gift of Stoic wisdom is this: the recognition that reality is not fixed but interpretable, that meaning is not discovered but created, that your experience of life is determined far more by how you see than by what you see. This gift doesn't change what happens to you, but it changes everything about how you experience what happens to you. And when you change how you experience life, you change your life itself. To hold water, you must cup your hands gently, squeeze too tightly, and it slips through your fingers. Hold too loosely, and it spills away. The art of living requires the same delicate balance, engaging fully with life while holding it lightly, caring deeply while remaining unattached, investing completely while accepting impermanence. This is perhaps the most difficult skill to master and the most essential for peace. Everything you love will eventually be lost. Every relationship will end, either through natural conclusion, growing apart, or death. Every possession will break, become obsolete, or be left behind when you die. Every role you play, child, student, employee, parent, leader, will eventually be outgrown or completed. Every body, including yours, will age, weaken, and ultimately fail. This is not pessimism. This is simply the nature of existence in a universe where everything is temporary. The human impulse is to fight this impermanence, to cling to what we value, to try to make permanent what is inherently temporary. We grip our relationships so tightly we suffocate them. We accumulate possessions as if ownership could create security. We desperately try to stop time, to prevent change, to maintain what we have exactly as it is. But this clinging is not preservation. It's the source of most human suffering. The Stoics understood that attachment, the desperate need for things to remain as they are, is different from love. Love appreciates what is present without demanding that it stay forever. Attachment cannot appreciate what is present because it's too busy worrying about losing it. Love enhances experience. Attachment diminishes it. Love allows for joy. Attachment creates anxiety. Watch how attachment operates in your own life. The relationship you enjoy becomes a source of stress because you're constantly worried about losing it. The success you've achieved becomes a burden because you're terrified of failure. The health you possess becomes a source of anxiety because you're afraid of illness. The happiness you feel becomes tainted by the knowledge that it won't last forever. This is the cruel paradox of attachment. The harder you try to hold on to something, the less you're able to enjoy it. The more desperately you cling to what you have, the more it feels like it's already slipping away. The stronger your attachment to permanence, the more acutely you feel the pain of impermanence. But letting go doesn't mean caring less. It means caring differently. It means loving fully while accepting that what you love is on loan from the universe, that you're a temporary steward rather than a permanent owner. It means investing completely in experiences, relationships, and endeavors, while accepting that all investments are ultimately temporary. This shift from ownership to stewardship changes everything. The parent who understands that their children are not possessions to be controlled, but individuals to be guided, can love them more freely. The employee who recognizes that their job is a temporary role rather than their permanent identity can engage more authentically. The person who sees their body as a borrowed vehicle rather than their essential self can care for it without being devastated by its inevitable changes. Letting go is not a one-time event, but a daily practice. Every morning, you can choose to hold the day lightly, to engage with whatever arises without demanding that it meet your expectations. Every evening, you can practice releasing what happened, celebrating what went well without clinging to it, learning from what went poorly without being defined by it. This practice becomes especially important during times of transition and loss. The job that ends, the relationship that concludes, the stage of life that's completed. These moments invite you to practice the art of letting go. You can resist the change and suffer, or you can accept the change and learn. You can fight the loss and be exhausted, or you can honor what was while remaining open to what might be. But letting go is not passive resignation. It's active acceptance combined with conscious engagement. You let go of outcomes while fully engaging with process. You release control over results while taking complete responsibility for effort. You surrender attachment to how things should be while remaining committed to responding skillfully to how things are. This distinction is crucial because many people misunderstand letting go as giving up, becoming indifferent, or stopping their efforts. But true letting go enhances rather than diminishes your ability to engage effectively. When you're not desperately attached to specific outcomes, you can see opportunities you would otherwise miss. When you're not clinging to how things should be, you can respond more creatively to how things are. The martial artist who has learned to let go can flow with their opponent's energy rather than fighting against it. The entrepreneur who has released attachment to their original plan can pivot when circumstances change. The parent who has let go of their specific expectations for their child can appreciate who their child actually is rather than mourning who they wanted them to be. Letting go also applies to your image of yourself, your identity, your story about who you are, your attachment to being seen in certain ways. As you grow and change, you must repeatedly let go of outdated versions of yourself to make room for who you're becoming. The successful executive must let go of that identity when they retire. The athlete must release their athletic identity when their body can no longer perform. The parent must surrender their active parenting role when their children become adults. These identity transitions can be among the most difficult experiences of letting go because we often confuse our roles with our essence, our achievements with our worth, our external identities with our internal reality. But each letting go of an outdated identity creates space for a more authentic and expanded sense of self to emerge. The practice of letting go also includes releasing the need to understand everything, to have all the answers, to make sense of life's apparent randomness and injustice. Some experiences cannot be fully understood. Some losses cannot be completely explained. Some suffering cannot be adequately justified. The attempt to understand everything often becomes another form of clinging to certainty, to meaning, to the illusion that life should always make sense. Sometimes the most profound letting go is the release of the need for life to be comprehensible, fair, or logical. This doesn't mean becoming passive or ceasing to seek understanding where understanding is possible. It means accepting that some mysteries will remain mysterious, some questions will remain unanswered, some experiences will remain incomprehensible, and that this is okay. This acceptance of mystery and uncertainty is liberating because it frees you from the exhausting effort of trying to control or understand everything. It allows you to engage with life as it is rather than as you think it should be. It enables you to find peace with incompleteness, comfort with uncertainty, and meaning within mystery. The person who has mastered the art of letting go lives with what Buddhists call non-attachment, the ability to be fully engaged while remaining inwardly free. They can work toward goals without being enslaved by them, love deeply without being possessive, care about outcomes without being controlled by them. This freedom transforms every aspect of experience. Relationships become more authentic because you're not trying to control others or prevent them from changing. Work becomes more creative because you're not rigidly attached to specific methods or outcomes. Life becomes more adventurous because you're not desperately clinging to security and predictability. But perhaps most importantly, letting go reveals what cannot be lost. The essence of who you are beneath all the roles, identities, possessions, and relationships that are temporary. When you let go of everything that can be lost, you discover what remains: your capacity for awareness, love, choice, growth, and presence. These qualities cannot be taken from you because they are you, not things you have. The fourth gift of Stoic wisdom is this: the recognition that holding life lightly allows you to live it fully, that releasing attachment increases rather than decreases your capacity for love, that letting go is not loss, but liberation. This gift doesn't make loss painless, but it makes loss workable, meaningful, and ultimately transformative. In learning to let go, you don't lose anything real. You only lose the illusion that anything was ever permanently yours to begin with. And in losing that illusion, you gain the ability to appreciate everything more deeply while it's present, to love more freely while love is possible, to live more fully while life is available. The art of letting go is the art of living with open hands and an open heart, ready to receive whatever comes, grateful for whatever is present, peaceful with whatever passes away. You have been broken and you have healed. You have fallen and you have risen. You have been defeated and you have continued. You have lost what you loved and you have loved again. You have faced your worst fears and discovered they could not destroy you. You have confronted your deepest pain and found that you were larger than your suffering. Through it all, through every trial, every setback, every moment when you thought you couldn't go on, something within you has remained intact, undamaged, undefeated. This is your unbreakable soul. It is not unbreakable because it cannot be hurt. It has been hurt repeatedly, deeply, sometimes devastatingly. It is not unbreakable because it never cracks. It has cracked, shattered, seemed irreparably damaged. It is unbreakable because it possesses the infinite capacity to heal, to regenerate, to emerge from destruction stronger and wiser than before. It is unbreakable because its essence, your capacity for awareness, choice, love, and growth, cannot be diminished by any external force. This soul has been your companion through every experience, your witness to every event, your constant presence in every circumstance. It was there when you were born, and it will be there when you die. It has observed your successes without being inflated by them, and your failures without being diminished by them. It has remained stable while your emotions fluctuated, consistent while your circumstances changed, whole while your life seemed to fall apart. The Stoics called this your inner citadel, the fortress of self that no siege can breach, the sanctuary that remains inviolable regardless of what attacks it faces. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." He was pointing to this unbreakable core, this essential self that contains everything necessary for peace, dignity, and fulfillment. This soul is not your personality, which can be shaped by experience. It is not your emotions, which rise and fall like weather. It is not your thoughts, which come and go like clouds. It is not your body, which ages and changes. It is not your roles, which are temporary. It is not your achievements, which can be lost. It is the awareness that observes all of these phenomena, the consciousness that experiences them, the freedom that chooses how to respond to them. Recognizing this unbreakable core changes how you relate to every challenge. When you know that your essential self cannot be damaged, you can face difficulty with courage, rather than terror. When you understand that your worth is not dependent on external circumstances, you can engage with uncertainty without desperation. When you realize that your peace comes from within, you can navigate chaos without being overwhelmed. This doesn't mean that challenges become easy or that pain becomes pleasant. It means that you approach difficulty from a place of inner strength rather than inner fragility. You know that whatever happens, some part of you will remain intact, capable of learning, growing, and continuing. This knowledge provides a foundation of security that cannot be shaken by external events. The unbreakable soul expresses itself through what the Stoics called the four cardinal virtues: wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. These are not external achievements, but internal capacities that can be developed regardless of circumstances. They represent the full flowering of human potential, the complete expression of what it means to be both rational and compassionate. Wisdom is the ability to see clearly, to distinguish between what you can control and what you cannot, to understand the temporary nature of all external conditions, to recognize that your peace and dignity come from within rather than from without. Wisdom sees through illusions and penetrates to the truth of things as they are, rather than as we wish they were. Justice is the commitment to treating others fairly and contributing to the common good, not because you expect reciprocation, but because justice is the natural expression of a soul that understands its connection to all other souls. Justice recognizes that individual well-being and collective well-being are ultimately inseparable. Courage is the willingness to do what is right, regardless of the consequences, to speak truth when truth is needed, to take stands when stands are required, to face difficulties when difficulties cannot be avoided. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act rightly despite fear. Temperance is the practice of moderation and self-regulation, the ability to enjoy pleasures without being enslaved by them, to face pain without being overwhelmed by it, to maintain balance in the midst of extremes. Temperance creates the stability that allows for wise choices rather than reactive impulses. These virtues are not rules imposed from outside, but the natural expression of an unbreakable soul that has discovered its own strength. They emerge not from obligation, but from understanding, not from fear of punishment, but from love of excellence, not from external pressure, but from internal integrity. The person who has connected with their unbreakable soul becomes remarkably effective in the world, not despite their spiritual development, but because of it. They can take risks because they're not afraid of failure. They can love deeply because they're not terrified of loss. They can speak honestly because they're not dependent on others' approval. They can act boldly because they're not paralyzed by uncertainty. This effectiveness comes not from callousness, but from clarity, not from detachment, but from proper attachment. Attachment to virtue rather than to outcomes, to character rather than to circumstances, to internal rather than external sources of security and satisfaction. But perhaps, most importantly, the unbreakable soul discovers that its strength is not meant for self-protection alone, but for service to others. The person who has found their own unshakable center becomes a stabilizing presence for others who are still searching for theirs. They become a living demonstration that it's possible to face life's difficulties with dignity, grace, and even joy. This service is not sacrifice. It's the natural overflow of inner abundance. When you're connected to an unbreakable source of strength within yourself, you have strength to offer others. When you've found peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances, you can help others find that same peace. When you've discovered that your worth is inherent rather than earned, you can see and affirm the inherent worth of others. The unbreakable soul also understands that strength and gentleness are not opposites, but partners. True strength doesn't need to prove itself through domination or aggression. It can afford to be kind, patient, forgiving, and compassionate because it's not operating from a place of vulnerability or insecurity. This integration of strength and gentleness, power and compassion, invincibility and humanity represents the full maturation of the human spirit. It's what the Stoics meant when they spoke of the sage, not a perfect person who never makes mistakes, but a complete person who has access to their full range of human capacities. The journey to discovering your unbreakable soul is not about becoming someone different. It's about uncovering who you already are beneath all the layers of conditioning, fear, and false identification. It's about remembering rather than learning, returning rather than arriving, recognizing rather than achieving. This soul has been with you all along, waiting patiently for you to notice it, to trust it, to allow it to guide your choices and responses. It has never abandoned you, never judged you, never stopped believing in your capacity for growth and healing. It is the friend who has never left your side, the teacher who has never stopped offering wisdom, the source of strength that has never run dry. The final gift of Stoic wisdom is this recognition that within you lies a capacity for peace, dignity, love, and wisdom that no external force can damage or destroy. This capacity is not dependent on your achievements, your relationships, your health, your circumstances, or your past. It is your birthright as a conscious being, your inheritance as a rational creature, your true nature as a human soul. You cannot control the world, but you can master yourself. You cannot eliminate suffering, but you can transform your relationship to it. You cannot avoid loss, but you can find meaning within it. You cannot prevent change, but you can grow through it. You cannot escape difficulty, but you can dance with it. This is the promise and the challenge of Stoic philosophy. Not that life will become easy, but that you will become capable. Not that pain will disappear, but that you will discover your strength. Not that the world will change to accommodate you, but that you will develop the wisdom and courage to engage with the world as it is, while remaining true to who you are. The fire that once threatened to consume you has become the light that illuminates your path. The wounds that once seemed to weaken you have become the source of your compassion. The challenges that once seemed to defeat you have become the proof of your resilience. You are unbreakable, not because you cannot be hurt, but because you can be hurt and heal, fail and rise, lose and love again. You are unbreakable because breaking and mending have become your way of growing stronger, and growing stronger has become your way of serving life. This is who you have always been. This is who you remain. This is who you will always be. An unbreakable soul, temporarily housed in a fragile body, learning to love and be loved in an impermanent world. The brutal truths that once hurt to hear have become the gentle wisdom that guides your choices. The pain that once seemed meaningless has become the teacher that developed your character. The suffering that once threatened to destroy you has become the fire that forged your unbreakable soul. And now you know you are stronger than any storm, deeper than any pain, more enduring than any circumstance, not because you are invulnerable, but because you are infinitely capable of healing, learning, growing, and loving again. This is the final truth, the one that doesn't hurt to hear, because it has become who you are, unbreakable, undefeated, and eternally capable of rising.